Guys, good morning. All right. Let me first open that batch class which we wrote the last session. So let's start everything. Just the name of that class was hiring manager updater batch. So I would be opening that batch hiring manager updater batch. This is the class. Now we have seen like how we can write on a batch class and what is the structure of a batch class. What is going to be the scenarios on which we should always go with a batch program. So I guess almost everything what I know about this has already been discussed. There's nothing which has been left apart from one thing, which is what is the purpose of finish method? Because in the last program, I mean in the last session when I was creating all this, I told you that we are going to have a discussion on this. So gradually, with a certain small dose, with every content, like we have understood how we can write down a batch program, which is going to be the purpose of a batch program, right? Now let me talk about this. What is the purpose of finish method? So basically, and these are some of the important things which usually have been asked inside in an interview. So first thing would be like you have to pay an attention over here. What I'm saying, you have to pay attention on that. And second and more importantly, you have to write it down. You would have to write it. There is one question. Like I have told you about few things. Like if we wanted to discuss how many number of times the start method, execute method, and finish method, how many number of times they are called, they are invoked. To answer this is like start and finish, start method and finish method. They are always invoked only once in a program. They are always executed only once. They are always called only once. But how many number of times the execute method is going to be invoked, that completely depends on this count, like how many number of batches have to be executed. So it all depends on number of count of batches. And we also have understood how we are going to execute a batch program. That is also we have seen in the last session. Whenever you are implementing, whenever you are executing a batch program, you first of all would require to create an object of that program. The first step is to create an object. Sorry, I'm very sleepy right now. But you should concentrate on what I'm saying, not on how I'm saying. So the first step is to create the object of that batch class. And how to create the object? This is very simple, and this is the same step. Even for any of the class, if I would be creating it for account, I'll point around account, the object name equals to new account. All right. So the step is same. There's no difference. Now this is my first step. This is my first step. Now in the second step, you have to go with database dot execute batch. Now this execute batch have literally two different forms of it, right? Two different forms of it. In the first, like if you would give just like this, and you would mention this like name of the object over here, then it would be executed without without mentioning any batch size. And if you would not mention any batch size, so we know one thing, that see the batch size could be minimum, it could be 1, and it could be maximum up to 2000. But when you don't mention that batch size, in that case, the system would assume it by its own. And the default batch size of 200 would be taken in this case. That means 200 records per batch. So that is the first way. The second way is like you give a batch size, which is going to vary between 1 to 2000. Right. So this is the way we could execute a batch program. This is everything we have studied. Now there are few more things which I wanted to discuss over here before going further with the next topic, which is stateful interfaces. I wanted you to understand that. Although I cannot demonstrate to you, but this is something which you should know, and it's very important. The question is, please write it. Can a batch program call another batch program? Can a batch program call another batch program? Answer is yes. Yes. Yes, one batch program can call another batch program. Yes, of course. Yes. We can call one batch another batch inside another batch. So if there already a batch class is created, so if there is already a batch class is created, and you wanted to call that batch class, I'll try to pick up certain example for this. Let me see where if somewhere I have designed this. I'm going to paste you the code or maybe the screenshot on your script. I'll try to get it for you. Give me some time for that. But yes, if the question is, can we call a batch class into another batch class? The answer is yes. This is called as nesting of batch, concatenations of batch. So if you wanted to concatenate, if you wanted to nest the batches classes, it is done from the finish method. That means if you are calling a batch class, if you are calling a batch class, it should be called within the finish method. Within the finish method. Let's consider, for instance, now we have a batch class. Let's consider I have a batch class number 2. How I'm going to call that? So what I'm going to do, we just did that. Let's say there is a batch class 2. For an instance, try to assume that I have a batch class whose name is batch class 2. So how I'm going to call that batch class inside in this batch class? So I'm going to create an object of that. New batch class, batch class. Let me take an object. B batch equals to new batch class 2. All right, new batch class 2. So this is what I just have created an object of that batch class. For an instance, we assume that there is a batch class whose name is batch class 2. What I have created an object of that, right? And now see what I'm going to do. Database dot execute batch, database dot execute batch. And I would going to give this name. In that case, the default batch size would be assumed. Otherwise, if you wanted to give the batch, no problem. That count as well. So this is the way, this is the way to call another batch inside a batch class. And it's giving the error, obviously, because it tries to find out if there is a batch called batch class 2. It have not find that. And this is the reason we are looking into the errors over here. Invalid type batch class 2. Invalid type means there is no such class. There is no such class. His name is batch class 2. We also know that, right? We also know that. We are just trying to understand if I wanted to call in batch class into another batch class. Is it possible or not? The first thing, it is possible. The first thing is, yes, it is possible. But if you wanted to do that, it cannot be done inside start method. It cannot also be done inside the execute method. It is done inside finish method. So whenever you wanted to call a batch into another batch, you have to create the object and then database.execute batch. You have to call it inside finish method. You have to call it inside the finish method. So that is the answer to this question. Can we call a batch class into another? The answer is yes. How? Inside in the finish method, we have to create the object of that second batch class. And then with the help of database.execute batch method, we can call this inside over here. So what is going to be happen? After executing this class, When it comes to the finish method, it is going to call this batch, and this batch would now be executed. This batch would now be executed. So it's something like, you have executed this hiring manager batch, and just after hiring manager batch, you have executed batch number 2, right? Inside in batch number 2, if you have written batch number 3, that is also going to be executed. So this is a chaining of the process, right? This is the chaining of the process. So yes, it is possible. This was first thing. This was first thing what you should know. This was first thing what you should know. Now, second, I have told you in the last session that, and I have shown you even, when we would execute this batch program, the log file is not generated. That means I cannot go to log file to see what has just been happened with this batch class. Even though the log was generated, it was a blank log. Right? There was nothing. There was no impressions of this execution. There were no impressions of this execution onto that log. So we cannot literally track anything by the log file. So I have shown you another way to do that. We can go to monitor and then jobs, and we can execute. So we can click onto the Apex job, and we could see, what does happens with the job, that that uh, that batch class, right? So how many number of the batches were there? How many of them was processed? How many of them was failed? Who has submitted? When he has submitted? What's the name of the class? What is the name of this Apex job ID? So one thing, what should we understand over here is like every batch class have a ID. Every batch class have a ID. This is called as Apex job ID. Every batch class have a ID. Apex job ID. Now let's understand one thing. Guys, give me 2 minutes. I'm muting myself for 2 minutes. I'll come back. Yes. So the another common interview question related to this is, because you also have seen and you also have witnessed, like whenever a batch is executed, a batch program is executed, whatever the log file that is generated for this, it does not have any impressions. It does not contains any information related to that execution. First of all, let's understand why this happens. Why this happens. All right. Every asynchronous operation, listen this very carefully. Very carefully. And it would be better if you guys would write it down. I wanted every one of you to please create your own running notes for now, at least. And then you have to make them fair. Every asynchronous operation. We have started with a topic called asynchronous programming. I am teaching you a batch class. All right. But the batch class comes under asynchronous programming. Not just batch class. We would going to learn called a scheduled program. We are going to learn future methods and queuable interfaces. All 4 of them. All 4 of them. So every asynchronous quantity, whether it's a batch class or a scheduled class, or if it is a future method, or rather a queuable interface, every asynchronous quantity is always executed out of the organization. Is always executed out of the organization. That means when I say out of the organization, it means it does not have any impression to that particular organization from which it is being called. Like we are calling this batch program, we are invoking this batch class from this organization. But this is not going to execute it, this is not going to execute it according to the scope of this organization. Rather, it is executed beyond that. And not just with asynchronous programming, APIs, APIs also. It and that is the reason, that is the reason it is always advised that you should keep the scope as global. You should keep the scope as global. Why? Because these programs are executed out of the organization. Your web services, the application program interfaces, what you are going to create during integration, and your batch class, they all are executed out of the scope of present organization, beyond the governor limits of present organization. Because with the present organization, there is a governor limit. Like if I have designed a query, this query can maximum return me 50,000 records. If I have any DML, that DML statement could be executed, could be processed only on 10,000 records. But don't you think that this batch class is going beyond that? It's crossing the governor limits. Yes, it is. With database.getQueryLocator method, this query is capable to fetch 50 million records, not just 50,000. 50,000 was the governor limit. 50,000 was the governor limit, but governor limit of what? Governor limit of this organization. This program is being stored inside this organization. This is that client where the program is present. Where this program is present, right? This program is present inside in this client, inside in this client, right? I can show you that as well. No problem. If I would go to, for example, develop, inside in develop, if I would go to Apex class, we can even find it out over here. Hiring manager updater batch. Don't you see it? The API versions and everything. Size without comments. Like these are the number of characters. So everything. So this program, which is a part of this organization का मतलब आप समझते हो? I hope you know this. Organization मतलब आप समझते हो? This is that organization. 00D 5 something. This organization is present on AP24 server. This is the organization. This is a class which is a part of this organization. But when this program is executing, beyond the scope of that. Because on the organization, there is governor. For this program, there is no governor. Rather extended governor, I should say. No governor limit is wrong. Extended governor limit. So instead of fetching 50,000 records only, this program is capable to work on 50 million. Instead of performing DML just on 10,000 record, this program is capable to perform it all of the data, whatever has been fetched, but in the form of batch. So basically, the asynchronous programs like batch programs, schedulable program, future methods, queuable methods, everything is always executed beyond the scope of present organization. So that is the reason when this program was executed, nothing was being written onto the log file. So if the log file is not generating, how we can track the results? So this is another interview question. I have told you like 3 to 4 questions for this. First, what is the structure of a bash program? Right? That is the first question what could be asked. This is the answer. What is the structure of a bash program? Second, how many number of times start, execute, and finish get invoked whenever a bash class is executed? That was second question. I have also answered you that start and finish, they are executed only once, they are invoked only once, whereas execute method, that depends on the number of the count of the batches we have. All right. Third question, what is the default batch size? What could be the batch size? What is the range of batch size? It's between 1 to 2,000. What is the default size? 200. How you can give the batch size? How you can give the batch size? So whenever we invoke database dot execute batch, so that time we can have 2 parameters. But in the second parameters, I could give the size of the batch. That is third question. Fourth question, can we call one batch into another batch? Yes, of course we can do that. If we wanted to perform the chaining or nesting, or concatenation of the batch program. We have to invoke the second batch class which you wanted to call. We have to invoke that finish method, inside finish method. That was number 4 or 5, I guess. Now next, I guess probably the last question which could be asked around this. How to track the result of a batch program? If a batch program is executed, how we can track the result? How we can track the result? So people used to give only one answer to this, which job में अभी पढ़ाने वाला हूँ आपको. ठीक है? I have seen, if I have asked this question in interview, they have given me the correct answer for that. I'm not saying the answer was wrong. I'm saying that that answer could be extended a little more. If that was happened, I obviously get a more interest from that candidate. People usually give only one answer, which I am also going to tell you the same thing. But I would be telling you, right, another way to answer that. First, let's understand. See, the first way is to go with the user interface. From the user, I mean, I can say there are two ways. There are two ways to track. If this program has been executed, if I wanted to track the result of that, I can do it in 2 different ways, or maybe rather in 3 different ways. Please write it down. Please write it down. Because I know, like, आप लोग बहुत जल्दी भूलने वाले हो. Please write it down. If someone would ask me this question, how to track the results of a batch class, right? I will give you the complete set of that answer. कैसे बोलूं? If this question was being asked to me, my answer would be like, directly, I would not directly jump to the conclusion. See, always, whenever you are giving an answer, if you wanted to give in a right way, you should always elaborate. You should always elaborate the problem statement itself. This shows how much confident, this shows how much knowledgeable person you are. People always try to jump onto conclusion and they were always in hurry to give the answer. During interview, if you are in a very hurry to give the answer, that just does not represents your knowledge. Rather, it would represent your anxiety and your nervousness. That you are so nervous, you are so excited in a wrong way. The word is anxiety for that. You just wanted to finish this up. You wanted to wrap this up as early as possible. This is not your comfort zone, and you are not feeling comfortable. You wanted to get out of this as early as possible. Don't let the interviewer have this impression of yours. I always be cool and calm. मेरा एक दोस्त था, when I have started giving all this interview. अब तुम्हारे जैसी हमारी preparation थोड़ी ना हुई थी यार. हमको तो it was something like they started taking us from like क्या बोलते हैं, किनारे से उठा लेना और भी समंदर मिला के छोड़ देना somewhere around. And we were in the mid of nowhere that time when this training was completed for me, the sales was. And when they announced that now your class is being over, you have to start hunting for the job. So I feel that I'm in the mid of nowhere. So when the interview was started, I too have that anxiety. I too have that feeling. कितना पढ़ लिया है what they are going to ask, like mock वगैरह कुछ भी नहीं, it was nothing. तो हाँ, मेरा पहला इंटरव्यू, the first interview was with the IBM. I still remember that. हमारा बहुत प्रिपरेशन किया था यार, पता है क्या, बहुत. And I was very much excited about that interview. IBM, like बचपन से सुन रहा हूँ, जब से आया हूँ मैं कंप्यूटर इंजीनियरिंग. IBM इंटरनेशनल बिजनेस मशीन. तो मैं बोला यार, I feel myself lucky that मेरे को पहला कॉल जिंदगी का उसने दिया. And you know what? I guess 10 minutes maximum, or maybe in 7 minutes they have wrap up the call. They directly jump. Introduction भी नहीं हुआ था, I guess, I'm not sure. They just have put up me one scenario. एक scenario दिया. I was unable to decode that. Then he gave me second scenario. I was unable to do that. बस wind up कर दिया उसने. So it was like 5 to 7. Within 5 to 7 minutes, I was being out of that interview. मेरे को बहुत बुरा लगा था बहुत. So that demoralized me a lot. उसके बाद फिर आने वाले 2-3 इंटरव्यू भी शायद ऐसे नहीं हुए. So I was like बहुत डाउन हो गया था. मैं बोला था यार ये बहुत गलत हो रहा है. एक मेरा फ्रेंड है यूएस में, मंजुल नाम है उसका, बहुत अच्छा दोस्त है मेरा. सो मतलब ही वाज द फर्स्ट पर्सन हु वाज सेइंग मी कि तू आईटी में आ, और वेस्टिंग योर टाइम इन एजुकेशन, तू आईटी में आ, आईटी में आ. देन आई वाज आस्किंग हिम कंटिन्यूअसली, यार तू टेक्नोलॉजी तो बता मेरे को. देन ही ट्राई टू डिग दैट. अभी वो सर्विस नाउ में है, एंड ही इज लाइक विद द कोर टीम सर्विस नाउ, बहुत अच्छे खासे पोजीशन पे. उसने बोला या तो सर्विस नाउ पे आ या फिर सेल्स फोर्स में आ. बट सेल्सफोर्स का इंडिया में मार्केट बहुत अच्छा है. इवन माई सेल्फ इज ऑल्सो फीलिंग कि ये सही ग्रो कर रहा है, तो इसमें जा. So he was the person who suggested me this technology. तो जब I had a talk with him, यार मेरे इंटरव्यूज ऐसे जा रहे हैं ऐसे जा रहे हैं. You know what he said to me? "Wait, what the worst could happen with you? Tell me what the worst could happen with you." I said, no, nothing. I mean, although there is nothing worse could happen, something bad could happen. So, all right, tell me then, what bad could happen with you? I said, I'm not going to get that call. There's no issue into that. Do you know one thing? Do you know one thing? There are more than 10,000 companies, in there, those who are working in India, having this technology. And you could have, if you would consider only 25% calls from them, then in at least you are going to get 2,500 calls out of that. So what is the issue if you are getting fail even in 0.1% of that? तो बोले कोई तेरी जान लेके थोड़ी ना जा रहा है. Nobody is asking for your money as well. It is just a waste of time and nothing else. So why you are feeling like that? तो मेरे को भी एहसास हुआ कि यार सही तो बात है. This is just a matter of few interviews where I'm not getting, I mean, I'm receiving, uh, I'm not getting clear. Then that actually boost up my confidence. उसके बाद मैं इंटरव्यू जब होते थे ना, so I even from the beginning itself I used to convince myself, होगा तो होगा, नहीं तो दूसरा देख लेंगे. But that confidence, अपना जो अपने इंडियन लोगों का होता है ना, that confidence, उससे इतनी मदद मिली ना, उसके बाद फिर मैंने अच्छे से देना शुरू करा. And from that moment itself, I started converting the calls. First round clear होगा था, second में fail हो जाता था, फिर first clear होगा, second clear होगा, HR में डब जाता. ऐसा चलते चलते जर्नी आई मेरी. बट अभी कैसा है तुम लोग के साथ, हम लोग कैसा है कि एक टेस्टेड प्रैक्टिस रन करते हैं, तुमको उतनी तकलीफ नहीं जाती है क्योंकि तुम्हारे लिए मॉक्स इंटरव्यूज होते हैं. वी ट्राई टू सिमुलेट एवरीथिंग विद यू. हम लोग वी ट्राई टू सिमुलेट एज फार एज पॉसिबल, जिसमें हम लोग मशीन टेस्ट और 4 राउंड और ये सब करवाने की कोशिश करते हैं. सो यू एटलीस्ट हैव एन आइडिया कि इन एन एग्जैक्ट इंटरव्यू how could the interviews proceed and what in a way this whole structure is designed, right? So you at least have a little background of it. थोड़ा बहुत वेरिएशन होता ही है इसमें एक्चुअल इंटरव्यूज के साथ में, बट एटलीस्ट यू हैव अ बैकग्राउंड आइडिया अबाउट दैट. चलो, so the first question that could be asked is how the batch class looks like to be, or maybe what is the purpose of writing a batch class. That could be a question. Second, how many number of times these methods inside the batch class are going to be invoked. Third, how to execute a batch class, and what about the batch sizes and all that. What is the range of batch size? What is the default batch size? How to give the batch size? This all covers under to this. Then can we invoke another? Can we call another batch into this batch? Yes, of course. Chaining and nesting is possible, and this is the way to do that. And final question: how to track the batch class? So if this question was being asked to me, what is going to be my way to answer that? Before that, before that, I'll first of all, because time is running out, let me tell you that way, the third way, and then I would give you the complete answer. There is an object, there is a system object, there is a standard object called as async apex job. There's a standard object for this. Inside in the Salesforce, there is a standard object for this. There's an object called as async apex job. All right, there's an object called as async apex job. So what we really do is let me try to take you to that program. See, what we try to do is like, whenever a batch class is executed, everything related to batch class, that goes to async apex job. If I would show you what are the like what are the fields inside that async apex. See, there is a standard object called async apex job. Now, whenever a batch class is executed, all things, all of the results, all of the status and everything that is tracked, that is get copied into this. A new record inside of async apex job is always created whenever a batch class is executed. Now you can see these are the fields of that. These are the fields. We also have one thing like we know that when this batch was executed, this is that batch ID 7075 and VRL. Now, in the same way, if you would see, whenever a batch class is executed, so it's mentioning you up to see VRL, right? यहाँ पे आपको सिर्फ यहाँ पे you would only going to see the 15 digits of that. But here all 18 digit, because we know the IDs, the record IDs, they are always of 18 digit. But आप user interface में देखते हो तो उसको सिर्फ 15 digit नजर आता है, isn't it? But यहाँ से आप देख रहे हो कि ये है वो batch class. This is that batch class. ठीक है? Who created that? So now let's talk about what are the fields of async apex job. So it first it has ID, then created date, created by ID. So it would always indicate the name of user. 005 is user object. Here also you see the same thing, Here also you see the same thing. Training batch, this submitted by. Submitted by is like created by. Job type, apex class ID, कौन सी क्लास है जहाँ जैसे यहाँ पे नाम आ रहा है तो यहाँ पे उसका apex क्लास का आईडी आता है. स्टेटस क्या है, टोटल नंबर ऑफ जॉब आइटम्स कितने थे, जॉब आइटम्स प्रोसेस जितने प्रोसेस हुए टोटल कितने थे, नंबर ऑफ एरर्स कितना था, कब कंप्लीट हुआ, कंप्लीटेड डेट, मेथड नेम अगर कोई है तो एक्सटेंडेड स्टेटस, यहाँ पे स्टेटस आ रहा है उसमें कि व्हाट हैपेंस. तो जैसे कुछ रिकॉर्ड्स हमारे फेल्ड हुए हैं तो वो लिख के आ रहे हैं यहाँ पे एंड एवरीथिंग. So this is that object. So the answer to this question is how to track, like there is an object called async apex job, which is a standard object. And what happens is like, whenever a batch class typically is executed, so the status, the results related to that, not result, the status related to batch class is being stored, is automatically gets stored into async apex job. And these are the fields of that. So what we can do is like, if you wanted to track, so what you can do is like, if you can fire a query. You can fire a query like this. Just I have like, मैं तो यहाँ पे fields all ले लिया, but you can have like ID, status, total number of job items, everything, यहाँ पर है सारी चीजें, total job items, number of errors completed, whatever field you wanted, you can fire a query from everything, async apex job. And ये जो हमारा database dot batchable context है, इसमें जैसे b context नाम का variable बनाया था मैंने, this always contains the current jobs ID. Where the ID equals to, somebody was asking me कूलन का क्या काम है कल, तो मैंने कहा था whenever we wanted to put a dynamic entity into the SQL query, जैसे यहाँ पे जो ID है, this ID ये वाला, ये ID I'm not taking anything, यहाँ पर तो सारे दे लिया मैंने, but if I specifically wanted कि ये वाला ID मिले मुझे, so उसको हमने कैसे किया कि like where the ID equals to कूलन यानी डायनामिक, सो डायनामिकली बी कंटेक्स्ट ये जो है उसका गेट जॉब आईडी, उसमें से आईडी निकालो, बिकॉज ये पूरा जॉब है, उसमें से आईडी निकाल लो. सो पर्टिकुलरली इस प्रोग्राम का स्टेटस आपको मिल जाएगा async apex job पर. तो दिस इज द वे, दिस इज द वे टू ट्रैक द रिजल्ट प्रोग्रामेटिकली. बट एक चीज इसमें भी जान लो आपकी, इवन दो इफ यू वुड एग्जीक्यूट द सेम थिंग, आप इस प्रोग्राम में अपना ये भी शामिल करते हो, तब भी आपका लॉग फाइल जनरेट नहीं होता है. लॉग किसी भी सूरत में जनरेट नहीं होता है, लॉग किसी भी सूरत में जनरेट नहीं होता है. So even though if I would execute the same program, ठीक है, देखो ये प्रोग्राम में if I would execute this once again, right? If I would execute this once again, default batch size ले लेता हूँ मैं 200. And if even though if I would execute the same thing, और भले ही यहाँ पे हमने सिस्टम डॉट डीबग लगा रखी है ना, सिस्टम डॉट डीबग, एंड वी फील कि हमें बैच का आईडी मिल जाएगा, नहीं मिलता है। सी, तो डीबग, कभी डीबग से आपको रिजल्ट नहीं मिलेगा, ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड, डीबग से आपको रिजल्ट नहीं मिलेगा। ठीक है, नंबर ऑफ एसक्यूएल क्वेरीज 0, नंबर ऑफ डीएमएल 0, उसके हिसाब से कुछ हुआ ही नहीं है। बट if you have written this query that everything now has been stored inside a variable of async apex job, यहां से मैं इसको कैरी फॉरवर्ड कर सकता हूँ। भले मुझे लॉग में कुछ नहीं मिलेगा, लेकिन मैं इतना जानता हूँ कि ये जो बैच क्लास एग्जीक्यूट हुई है, उसका जो कुछ भी अभी रिजल्ट जनरेट हुआ है, दैट इज स्टोर्ड इनसाइड अ वेरिएबल कॉल्ड जॉब, जॉब डिटेल्स, या कोई भी वेरिएबल। यू कैन कैरी फॉरवर्ड दिस। मान के चलिए आपका एक विजुअल फोर्स पेज है और या फिर एक लाइटनिंग पेज है इन द फ्रंट एंड, एंड यू वांटेड टू डिस्प्ले द रिजल्ट, तो आप यहां से उसको कैरी फॉरवर्ड करवा सकते हो, बिकॉज यू एटलीस्ट हैव स्टोर्ड दैट रिजल्ट इनसाइड अ वेरिएबल। एक बार जब वो वेरिएबल में आ गया तो यू कैन कैरी फॉरवर्ड, आप उसको जहां चाहे वहां इस्तेमाल कर सकते हो। ठीक है, चलो, तो ये है वो ऑब्जेक्ट async apex job which is used to store the status of batch class after execution. Whatever is the status, whatever you should know about the execution that has happened, आपको async apex job पे क्वेरी फायर करना पड़ता है, जैसे कि मैंने यहाँ पे किया अभी, राइट। इफ आई वुड एक्सपोर्ट दिस, यहाँ एक एंट्री और आ जाएगी, ये देखो, तो देयर आर टोटल नाउ 6 रिकॉर्ड्स, राइट। तो रिसेंट वन जो है वो आ गया यहाँ पर। चलिए, now let me talk about, if this question has been asked, okay, how would you track the result of a batch class? So instead of directly jumping to the conclusion, my answer, if I wanted to start my answer would be like, actually what happens is whenever you execute a batch class, you don't get the log file. That means even though the log is generated, the log is completely blank. The log file does not have any impressions of current execution, right? Log file does not have any impression of the current execution. That means very obviously with the log file, I cannot track what has been happened to the batch class. This is my conclusion. So in the beginning itself, I am concluding that if you wanted to track the result of a batch class, it cannot be done with the log files. It cannot be done with the log file. So even though if you have written a system.debug, that itself does not give you anything. Because sometimes they even ask, if I have written a system.debug, in that case, what would happen? This is the proof of that. Even though if you have written system.debug, that would not be tracked inside log file, right? So you have to start giving the answer by a conclusion. So nothing has been written inside the log file. So there are 3 different ways to do that. In my opinion, I could track this in 3 different forms. Now, for example, if my batch class is updating few records of a particular object, if it is updating, and let's say if I have the access to that object, let's consider this program. This program is updating hiring manager object, records of hiring manager, and if I have the access to that object, I can directly move on to that object and to see the result. That is the first way, using user interface, right? Using user interface, I can do that. Using user interface, I can do that. I can directly go to that that object and see to the records, whether the records have been updated or not. That is the first way. Second way, I can go in the setup menu. That second way is again from the user interface itself. So from the user interface, there are 2 ways. Go to that object. If you have the accessibility of that object, go to that object, see to the records. The second, go to user interface, go to setup menu, go to jobs. In the monitor menu, you're going to find the job. Click on to Apex job, and it would, in a form of a small table, it would going to list out you the details of the execution, what has been happened with this batch. This is the second. And the third is, there is one standard object in Salesforce called async apex job. And this, like whenever a batch is executed, it would create an impression interface. There are the fields like created, ID created by, who created that, number of job items, number of job items was processed, number of the errors, and everything. So basically, it's status also, like it has been completed or what. or it is in pending, it is scheduled. So it will going to show you that status. So programmatically, if you wanted to track this in a program, so we can do this with async apex job. So there are three different ways. There are three different ways you can track the result of a bash class. These are all three of them. So my opinion is like, this is the correct way to answering this question. This is the correct way to answer this type of questions. You should, so whenever a question is asked, try to always talk on scenario. This would give a clarity of thought for you and for them as well. And this is the most appropriate way. Usually what happens, ये practice कोई develop नहीं करता. I used to say this for everyone, for every class. If a question is asked to you, why you straightly, why you are in so hurry to give the answer to that? Even if that is a simple question, see, you remember this or not? When I was teaching you the relationship, and as I have told you that if somebody would ask you this question, how many different forms of relationship we have? Don't directly start look up master detail, hierarchy. Don't go with that. You can start your answer by giving a count that would make him alert. Because usually people are habitual to see get the answer like there are three forms, there are four forms. But when you would say there are almost six different types of relationships. When you say this moment itself, you got the attention. And how much how much you grab the attention would make them more impressed. And that is the key to success. That is the key to clear that interview. So it 50% it depends on what you are answering, or maybe 40% it depends on what you are answering. More than 50% it depends how you are answering. You can impress them just from your first question itself, from your first answer itself. That's why we try to make those upgrades as far as possible in you. It's up to you whether you adopt that practices or not. Even though we give you the practice how to introduce yourself, that is again because when they are asking you about your introduction, my gut feeling is like you should deliver this in a proper way so that you grab their attentions with that first question itself. And there is no second chance to make the first impression. You were never going to get the second chance to make this first impression. That is why they used to say first impression is the last impression. आपको पता नहीं है ये बात, अभी it's almost like 6 months back. I was having one candidate. Mentors ने उसको approve कर दिया, सब approve कर दिया. When I was I usually get involved into the last interviews that time because mentors सब संभाल लेते थे. उसका final interview था. I was in Akola that time. तो उसका final interview था वो लड़की का, and he was delivering every technical aspect very good. I joined that later, little late I joined, and the interview was already been started. हो सकता है उसका introduction पहले ले लिया गया होगा. When I joined, everybody was asking about technical aspect. There was almost 5 to 6 persons. 1.5 घंटा interview लिया, and everyone, even I was also very impressed with the way he was trying to answer for the technical things. I listened this whole interview, and at the end, I just asked, "Can you please introduce yourself once again to me because I joined late?" And when she introduced me, I was not satisfied. मैंने रोक दिया. मैंने कहा नहीं. Even though she is very good in every technical aspect, my opinion for this candidate, she is not explaining herself about herself. She's not. And I know this is going to be the first question. I don't wanted her to get out in the first question. You have to work on this. So फिर मैंने उसको बोला कि no, you have to call me separately. Let's get connected offline onto this. And let's modify this. Once I would feel ki your introduction, you're good in delivering that, then again, then and then only I would tell to up your resume to your mentor. Otherwise. So see, this is like, I always used to say, interview is not about what you are answering. Interview is all about how you are answering to them. People are very hurry. They are very hurry in giving the answer. Think of it, talk about scenario. Talk about scenarios. Get that clarity. अभी देखो मैं एक बात बोलता हूँ. तुम सोचो इसको, साइकोलॉजिकली सोचो। एक क्वेश्चन तुम्हारे सामने आ गया, I'll give you one scenario, a simple scenario. If I would ask you like to write down an SQL query where you could fetch account and related contacts, or rather, if I would ask you to select own and give me a query where I can get only those contacts which are related to account. I mean, if I would, for example, select ID. One second, now select from contact. Now I don't want to fetch everything. For example, ID, comma, name, या फिर first name, है ना? First name and the last name. Last name of like something like this. This would return me everything out of the object. But if I particularly wanted to see, only those contacts which are associated to account, if this is my scenario, what you would do? What usually people used to do? Okay, fine. They start writing the query. No, this is not the query. This is not the query. I'll tell you how to answer the questions. हाँ, इसकी query by the way क्या रहेगी? Where account ID is not equals to null. Where account ID is not equals to. So total there is 141. Now if I would filter out, there are 134 records. So out of 141, there is 134 records who are associated. Account ID is not null, is that means कि उनके साथ account associated है. ठीक है? You can see account ID. Account ID. कॉलम और ऐड कर लेता हूँ, तो ये वो है जिसमें अकाउंट आईडी नल नहीं है. अदरवाइज अगर इसको हटा दूं तो वो भी कॉन्टैक्ट्स आएंगे जहां अकाउंट आईडी नल है, मतलब दे डोंट हैव एनी कॉन्टैक्ट. अब पीपल यूज्ड टू राइट डाउन दिस स्ट्रेटली, ऐसा नहीं रहा. दे वुड ऑलवेज आस्क यू टू लाइक ओपन द नोटपैड. ठीक है? एंड इफ आई एम गिविंग यू अ सिनेरियो, फॉर एग्जांपल, you have to first write the question. All right, so write the SQL to fetch only those contacts who were associated to any account. All right, ऐसा लिखो, and then ask him, okay, please confirm me whether this is your question. This is the scenario. Please confirm me. You wanted me to fetch only those contacts which are associated to an account. This is the scenario? If you would get this confirmation, you will say, yes, of course, I wanted the same thing. All right. I'll write out here. Select ID and let's say name from the contact where account ID spelling wrong हो रही कई जगहों पे, कोई problem नहीं. That is not counted. That is not even counted. बाद में आप correct कर सकते. Account ID is not null. Okay, select की spelling SELECT. Select name from the contact, है ना? Where की spelling WHERE. Where. So see, whenever if you would adopt this kind of practice, एक तो आपको भी समय मिल रहा है to think over it. You got that buffer time in your mind. क्या आंसर बनाना उसके साथ. इफ यू वुड ऑलवेज गेट दिस राइट टू आंसर वेरी स्पॉन्टेनियसली, आप अपने दिमाग को वक्त ही नहीं दे रहे उसके ऊपर सोचने का. ठीक है? सो डोंट डू दैट. दिस इज अ गुड प्रैक्टिस. Try to always write down the scenario. Try to always, if it's not possible to write, then talk on scenario. How many different forms of relationships we have in Salesforce? See, yes, usually people know about like 2 or 3. Mostly we use 2 or 3 forms of relationship. But I guess in my opinion, there are at least 6 different forms of that. अब ये क्या था? ये discussion है. Usually you have used, mostly we use like 2 or 3 forms of relationships, mostly. But then I guess there are, 6 different forms of relationships out there. So when you would try to start your answer by initiating certain discussions, then it always creates a clarity of thought. And this would make a very good impression, This would make a very good impression. और अपने कैसा भंटा डार करते हैं इसका. How many different forms of relationship? There is a lookup relationship. There is a master detail relationship. And you would start counting. मैं आंसर दे रहा हूँ, तुम काउंट करो. ठीक है? आप हमको ही काम पे लगा देते हो। तो कैसा देखो, आंसर्स क्या दे रहे हो और कैसे दे रहे हो उससे बहुत फर्क पड़ता है। तो ट्राई टू अडॉप्ट दिस प्रैक्टिसेस प्लीज। हाँ, वैसे मॉक में जितना हो सके कवर करने की कोशिश करेंगे, अगर मैं जितना मैं बताते चला जाता हूँ उसको ध्यान रखा करो। सो बैच के ऊपर कितने क्वेश्चंस आ सकते हैं? ऑलमोस्ट आई हैव कवर्ड यू एवरीथिंग। एंड दिस वन लास्ट थिंग जो मैं स्टेटफुल इंटरफेस से बताने वाला हूँ, दिस वन असाइनमेंट ओवर हियर, इसको देख लेना क्या है। तो कल स्टेटफुल इंटरफेस के ऊपर एक ये भी बैच की क्लास का ही एक हिस्सा है, इसमें इसमें एक लास्ट क्वेश्चन और बनता है हमारा। तो वो क्या है वो हम नेक्स्ट सेशन यानी कल हम इसके बारे में डिस्कस करेंगे। ठीक है, I guess that's all for today. Sufficient. Yes. Any questions you wanted to ask? Yes. Anybody wanted to ask? Any one of you wanted to discuss about it? Akash, you were asking me that yesterday, I guess, कि कूलन का तो खैर मैंने बता दिया आपको कूलन का क्या है। आप मुझसे पूछ रहे थे सीपीयू लॉक टाइम। सी, ये यहाँ पर ही सारी चीजें मेंशन रहती है। द मैक्सिमम सीपीयू टाइम, एंड दिस इज इन टर्म्स ऑफ मिली सेकेंड. So it's 10,000 millisecond. For 10,000 millisecond, you can engage the Apex runtime engine वहाँ जो server है उसके CPU का. After that, it would automatically become timeout. So this is that answer. यहाँ पे अगर आप देखो तो maximum चीजें यहीं से मिल जाती हैं आप. Maximum number of SQL queries in single transaction is always 500, is always 100. One SQL query could fetch up to 50,000 records. ठीक है. Maximum DML statements inside in a single transaction is 150. It's a allowed transaction. And using one DML, you could maximum fetch one. हाँ, one more question. Somebody has asked me. जैसे कि एक बार एक बैच में एक ने पूछा था मुझसे कि सर, I mean, using this, for example, using this query, if you are fetching 50 million records, up to 50 million, जैसे example दिया कि 20 million, then how it is even possible that आप सारे 20 million records के location और contact numbers को update कर दे रहे हो? Because update statement could only update up to 10,000 records. ठीक है भाई, मैं एग्जाम्पल मान के चलो कि अकाउंट के अंदर में 20 मिलियन रिकॉर्ड्स है, एग्जाम्पल है। फॉर एन इंस्टेंस यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट, यू हैव टू अज्यूम कि भैया यहाँ पर हमने 20 मिलियन रिकॉर्ड फेच किए। तो हाउ इट इज इवन पॉसिबल दैट आप अपडेट कर रहे हो 20 मिलियन रिकॉर्ड्स को? या 20 मिलियन भी क्यों चलते, चलो 1 लाख रिकॉर्ड या 50,000 रिकॉर्ड, या डीएमएल कैपेसिटी इज टू परफॉर्म अप टू 10,000, तो आप कैसे कर रहे हो ये? सो आई आस्क्ड टू हिम, ओके यू टेल मी वन थिंग, you tell me one thing, and this is question for you guys as well. Tell me one thing, what is the maximum batch size? Maximum batch size कितना है बताओ? What is the maximum batch size? Minimum it is 1. Now you tell me what is the answer for this? Minimum is 1 record per batch. What is the maximum batch size? 2000, right? अगर मैंने if while executing this, अगर मैं इसको execute करते वक्त, ठीक है, even if I have given 2000 as a batch size, even if I have given 2000 as a batch size, what does this means? 2000 per batch, 2000 per batch, right? और यहाँ पे क्या आ रहा है? यहाँ पे एक एक बैच आ रही है। देखो, स्टार्ट मेथड ने पहली बैच भेजा, डेटाबेस डॉट क्वेरी लोकेटर इज दैट कंपोनेंट, इज दैट पार्ट ऑफ प्रोग्राम विच वुड सेंड द बैच। इसने पहली बैच सेंड किया, भेजा, पुश किया। सो कहाँ लिया आपने? रिकॉर्ड टू प्रोसेस। तो पहला बैच जब आया रिकॉर्ड टू प्रोसेस, उसमें कितने रिकॉर्ड्स है? मैक्सिमम बैच साइज इज 2000। फिर वो 2000 को हमने चेक किया, भाई ये एम्प्टी है क्या? फिर उसने हमने इटरेट करना शुरू करा। वी आर इटरेटिंग एवरी रिकॉर्ड, every single record out of this. Maximum it is 2000. And with this for loop, if I would ask you how many number of times this for loop would execute, the answer is 2000. 2000 times. So you are updating, you can update up to 10,000, but maximum you are with this batch from, you are always updating it up to 2000. अब 2000 के chunks में आप कितना भी करो, है ना? तो this is why even though if the DML can be performed on 10,000, we are actually not providing that much of capacity with the batch program. Maximum it could be 2000 records per batch. यहाँ batch के हिसाब से काम चलता है, ना कि capacity के हिसाब से, ना कि capacity के हिसाब से. Understood? So this is why this is capable to perform, DMLs on millions of the records, even though even though the capacity was any DML is maximum 10,000. Even the capacity of DML is maximum 10,000, right? Yes. So that was the thing. Any questions? Any questions? Any another question, guys? All right. Then thank you so much for joining. Have a nice day.